if you don't invest in your people, you have no business.
Attrition is expensive. And if you're losing talent because they don't feel engaged and included, that's would have been worth spending the money. It's your time now to amplify the voices of the more marginalised people in our communities, and you need to get them a seat at the table too. It is your responsibility. We just want human rights, equal rights. My intention is just to raise awareness, to celebrate what we do and who we are.
The way I see it, the journey you're taking, it may be a longer route, but it can have so much more meaningful change. And, you know, an activism can come in many different forms.
It's a way for me to do something that hopefully will achieve some results by doing it my way.
Lee Thomas-Wragg, welcome to Never Mind the Job Spec, the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, dude. As I said to you, when I was thinking about kind of chatting in the podcast, typically we kind of explore, that kind of starting point of somebody's career journey when they leave education, what their thinking is, kind of what the choices they're thinking about. And then you sent me something that actually, when I read it, it made me feel quite emotional. And I realized then that our conversation wasn't really going to be about a career path. It was more about your personal journey and perhaps how that kind of career has intersected. And I just wanted to kind of read this to you, or read it back to you actually, because this is the bit that really made me kind of emotional. It was, so you express your openly queer man living in London with your husband of more than 6 years, which is amazing.
9 years together, 6 years married.
And it's really about the drive to empower the community. And I think the thing that really kind of made me emotional was how you kind of refer to your own authentic voice, speaking of class and social mobility and your experience of being excluded from society, bullied, harassed, and feeling the need to hide your true self. And I think when you're talking about that, clearly you're talking about the wider community as well. And that's the LGBTQIA community. And when I read that, I was like, we need to hear that story. And as we discussed just before we came on air, we spoke about this podcast over a year ago, 18 months ago, if not 2 years ago, and you weren't ready to talk then.
Yeah.
And I wonder, firstly, what's changed?
This version that you see of me today was not the version I had 18 months ago. It wasn't the version that I had when I was going through that journey.
Yeah.
With age comes wisdom. That's one thing, and life experience. So I think over the last 18 months, things have been kind of thrown into turmoil for me a little bit, and a loss of security. And so I just had to really step up. And I stepped up with that confidence that I'm actually now in a position where I don't need validation from others because I validate myself. And it's taken a long time to get there. So I'm really pleased that I now can look at myself and actually be happy with who I am, what I've achieved. And now I want to empower others to do the same, because thinking back, there were dark days at times, there's, and I don't want others to have to go through that if it's not needed. And at the moment, there's a backlash against the LGBTQIA communities, in particular, some of the more marginalized, like trans communities, non-binary. And the narrative in the media is portraying, again, for my communities to be predators, to villainize what we're doing, the trans community in particular. And we saw this in the 80s with gay men. So it's just, I really want now that I've established myself, to be able to help others with their journey too.
That's amazing. And it's kind of, I think, let's say when I read that, I was like, and we've known each other for a few years now. We started, kind of working together at Radical Recruit. Emma brought us together.
Days.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of nicknamed you Chief Joy Officer because you just brought such a kind of positive energy to everything. You just had this like massive empathy and ability to just kind of really understand and kind of connect with people. And the thought of you having to go through dark times and feel vilified, marginalized, bullied, it makes me feel fucking sad.
Oh.
And that's a kind of my reaction to it. The proactivity in me is, how can I support? How can I ally myself to you? And my first thought was, I want to give you a platform to talk about you. Yeah. Because you, as you said, you are now stepping up to be that voice for the community and others that have been through or maybe going through a journey that you've been through, and you don't want them to have to go through some of the tougher things that you've had to experience.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think it's beautiful to hear that you feel that confidence to really kind of share your story now, because, you know, we had conversations back then and you kind of gave me glimpses into your world, but never really knew the kind of backstory. Do you think that move from kind of corporate to something like Radical was perhaps a catalyst for that?
Yeah, it was. I've been quite comfortable to be out and gay at work for quite some time.
Yeah.
But the shift from corporates to go work with Radical really, they expected me to be my authentic self. Yeah. It wasn't even oh, you know, you can be. It was like, we expect you to be. So that expectation really did help me step onto that podium into the spotlight.
Yeah.
It's having allies is the most important thing, and which is hence why I started Changing Hearts and Minds consulting, because if we create allies, then whatever happens, because nothing is a given, and we have laws and regulations in place now, policies at work that protect from bullying, harassment, discrimination. But those are pieces of paper or they're acts and legislation. But if we don't have the hearts and the minds of the communities, then they don't mean really anything. So if we win over the hearts and minds of the communities, then whatever happens, changes of government, backlash against our communities, people will stand by our sides. And only 4% of the UK population, according to the census reports, I'm sure it's more than this, but only 4% disclose that they are LGBT.
Only 4%?
Only 4%, yeah.
I find that hard to believe.
It's hard to believe, but that's what we're working with. And so, but it is true. I mean, 1 in 5 people are not openly out at work because they're afraid to do so. Yeah. So probably they didn't tick on the census as well. So, but given if we take it that it is 4%, that's a tiny little bit. And that's so small. Like, if you look at that, it's quite a small voice. And we need allies to join us so that we raise that voice.
100%. And I think that there's a couple of pieces in that you just said there. And I think one thing to kind of maybe give a little bit more definition, clarity on is, what is allyship? You know, what is it to the community? And I appreciate there's different degrees of it, but what is allyship?
It's not doing it for your own purpose. That's the first thing. Yeah. And you see a lot of this type of allyship on socials.
Oh, God, yeah.
So people reposting my post, liking it or commenting on it. But it's just for them to show others that, oh, you know, we're a nice person. Yeah. But those things mean nothing unless there's some substance behind it. So you can't just put, I'm an ally, and then do no actions. Yeah. And it's okay to turn up at Pride and celebrate our finest moments, to go out socializing, because, you know, you always have fun with the LGBT community. But you have to have our back when times are tough, and you need to intervene if people are speaking untruths. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of untruths that are told. So speak up, correct them on socials, in person, and then champion us and tell people why you're friends with the LGBT community. Yeah. There's so many beautiful things that happen in my communities that are never publicized in the media because the media's narrative is to portray us in a bad way.
The right-wing press. I mean, that's a whole podcast on its own, my friend. But I do think, to your point, and we come back to that point around kind of large corporates, they have policies, they have procedures in place, etc. But they mean nothing unless somebody takes action based on having that in place.
On having it, yes.
And equally in that kind of workplace, it's like, oh yeah, we've got, kind of inclusivity policies, we've got diversity policies, et cetera, But if that's not actually part of the culture and the environment that individual experiences, it must feel like more of a betrayal, because it's there documented and then nothing's happening, as opposed to, well, it's not documented, so what do you expect kind of thing. But if it's there and it's documented, it's referred to, and say large corporates like posting, kind of social media content, etc. But if that's not the lived experience of individuals in that business, it must feel like a betrayal.
Yeah, it does. It's a slap in the face, and it's if you put a policy in place, then following that up with a webinar and employees ticking boxes, and then they say, we've done it. It just means nothing. You have to go in there and really allow them the opportunity to meet people from the LGBT communities, to hear our stories, give our communities a platform to speak on. People often will say, I don't like gays, or I don't like trans, and they don't even know any of the communities.
Exactly.
That's just based on the personas that are publicized in media. So there's a lot of work to do. It's great to have those policies in place. They're absolutely essential. There needs to be something that the line managers can refer to when they witness bullying and harassment. But they need to be really bought in. They need to see, okay, I don't want any kind of bullying as well. So allyship, I speak for the LGBT community, but I also speak for every diverse grouping. And allyship principles can be applied to all of them. So, like Black History Month, what does that mean for some organizations, apart from sticking up stuff on their socials to say, we're celebrating it, but actually, what are you doing in your business?
Are they creating platforms for those voices within the business? Are they prepared to put the people in front of the brand? So it's not all about the kind of what the brand awareness is taken from that. It's like, are you prepared to put people in front of your brand and back their opinions, their insights, as opposed to perhaps diluting them for more palatable audience? And it's kind of like, that bravery, certainly from large scale corporates, I don't see personally.
No, I don't see it either. And it's disappointing. And, I stepped away from the corporates. I then went back years after leaving Radical to explore possibilities of rejoining in an EDI capacity. And their initiatives were exactly the same from when I left. And it was still gender focused, which is, I'm not saying that that's not important. It really, really is. But that's their big focus still. And it's like there's a whole world of diversity.
Yes.
It means more than looking at pay gaps between people of color and white people. It means more than recruiting women if you're not actually sustaining that employment and being flexible to accommodate their needs to get them into the succession planning. So I feel like it is. So I was like, okay, this is not right. This is not what I want to do. So I thought, well, if nobody wants to embrace what I have to say and what I want to do, then I'm just going to do it myself.
I think that talks to the kind of confidence of voice that you feel you're owning now, and you're happy, empowered, confident to challenge. Because there must be a lot of what you do is challenging perceptions, challenging existing thoughts around what policies and procedures work, what don't work. And to your point, it's one thing to have policies to protect kind of minority groups, et cetera, but do you really understand who those policies affect and who they're protecting and who they're for? If you're not interacting in those communities, if you don't even know somebody from one of those, I mean, what's your reference point? It's kind of like, I just don't think it doesn't feel real or tangible, right? It's kind of, you know, and certainly when you think about kind of line managers, etc. Surely one of their key focus and roles is to get to know everybody in their team, in their function, et cetera, but really get to know them. Not on a peripheral level, but actually really get to know them. And I guess coming back to the question, how much do you find yourself kind of having to challenge and educate comparative to, in case in point, have you walked into a particular client business where you're like, oh my God, they've got it absolutely right here?
No.
I was going to say it's a loaded question because I think otherwise it's kind of like where would the work be type thing.
I mean, there are definitely great initiatives in place. I don't feel like anybody that I've met with has got it completely, and there's still work to do. But then there's always work to do. I feel like, you know, generations change. It's like having one thing in place now, does that actually align with Gen Zs?
Yes.
Gen Zs as a LGBTQIA communities, for me, they're the most exciting to come along. And I absolutely love to sit and talk with Gen Zs. And there was a report by Stonewall that demonstrated 72% of Gen Zs identify as heterosexual. So that's 28% identifying as something else. That's huge. Like when you go back and look at what baby boomers said.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like
big difference.
98% said something that they were heterosexual and 2% identified as something else. But with Gen Zs, everything's a bit more fluid. Gender, sexuality. And I love that because I think there's such a huge spectrum. And my generation, the generation above, even the one below is like always looking to put a label on something and stick someone in a box. And that's not what we are. Like we're fluid, we change. I'm not the person I was 10 years ago. And to try and make people, you say, oh, we're looking at diverse groupings, but then we're going to stick them into that box. And so much of a diverse person's being is it's intersectional. It sits within different diverse groupings. So to then put someone in one box, but they're in other boxes, it's just I feel like Gen Zs are now coming up with the way it really should be, and it's then sad to see how older generations then mock that and then put that down. You know, if somebody wants to be referred to as they, I 100% understand that. For me, I do say my pronouns are he, him, they, because part of me is within that spectrum. And it's great to be able to actually say that and feel that rather than to be, I'm he, him. And I don't always identify feeling like I fit that definition of a man. There's much more fluidity in it. So, but then you see TV hosts and stuff referring to Sam Smith, he. I don't understand, like, why not accept? And I know that there's obviously a need to educate and raise awareness, which is what I'm doing. But then also people should have acceptance, and it's you might not agree with how somebody wants to live their life, but it's their life. And if they're not harming anyone, just focus on your own.
There's so much in there. And the Sam Smith piece is really quite interesting, actually. I think it's held a light to certainly the media and where the media is tracking. But I just want to come back to, you sort of said the sort of generation. What generation are you? What generation?
I hate to admit, but I'm the back end of Generation X. So, I mean, when I was in my 20s and I stepped into recruitment after university, I was more ruthless. So I've always had kindness and some empathy, but that has developed over the years.
Yeah.
As I say, this version of me now was not the version I had at 25 years old, when I'd come from a working class background. My mother worked 2 jobs to send me to university.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to prove myself. So, and I did. By the time I got to 30, I had like a big house, a car, but then after that, it fell a bit flat. Actually, I earned the most money I've earned in my life in my 20s.
Yeah.
And then after that, it kind of took a downward spiral. But with that money, it doesn't always bring satisfaction. It's great to have. But I feel like, the generation piece is something that really needs to be acknowledged. And when you're recruiting, delivering the same message and hoping that a Gen X or a millennial or a Gen Z will all find that appealing is a bit naive. I feel like I've got friends in their 40s and they are already of that mindset that I would have imagined my parents had in their 40s. It's like, but you're gay. How can you not understand Gen Zs? Like, you're not making an effort. Yeah. And that's sad, really, because you feel like we had, in our time, we had a lot of things to contend with. Like, as children, we watched the news, we saw the AIDS epidemic, we saw the media around that. We had to deal with Section 28 when we were at school. I mean,
you think back at that time, you think, what the actual fuck? Those AIDS adverts were horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, horrendous. I mean, you just kind of think to yourself, it leaves me speechless.
Yeah, yeah.
And just one thing that you kind of mentioned there, you were more ruthless. I can't imagine a world where you would be ruthless in any way, shape or form. Your heart is too kind to be like that in any way, shape or form. But I wonder whether that kind of drive was driven by some degree of acceptance to still be proud gay man and achieve the same things as heterosexual peers. So it's almost like, I can do what you can do, but you know what? I can fucking do it better.
That, to an extent, is true. But I think back then I was more concerned with, I've hidden a lot of things in my life. And at university, I tried to hide that my background was working class. I was at Leeds University. The friends that I made there, their parents just had so much money. And so already I felt like I didn't fit in. And then thinking, and I'm gay, is like, this is a lot to hide. But I've been doing that since, early in my life, because it was recognized quite early by others that I was gay. And when people would say he's gay, I didn't even know what the word meant. I was that young. And with things that I was doing that I actually loved to do, dancing, gymnastics, they had to be suppressed, because if I did those, or art as well, I remember I really was enjoying like art, and then there was bits of harassment in class for that. And it was all like everything I wanted to do
got suppressed. Yeah.
And I had to focus on other things that I didn't like or want to do. And that's because society stereotypes, but you're a boy, so you like football and you should do this and you should be good at maths. And so it's breaking down those stereotypes. And then, after university, I wanted, because I'd been sort of integrated into the middle class, I then wanted to show that I was worthy of being there. So there's a big drive to kind of make some money, have a nice house, a nice car, have nice things. Saturdays in Harvey Nicks, drinking champagne, it was like, but then I think that, as you say, because I've always had a big heart. And I think as then it turned into my 30s, it was like, but there needs to be something more, really. And that's when the change started. And also as well, I'd reached a point in my career where I was a leader then. And so I was then empowering younger people who were coming in to do recruitment for them to excel. And then I think of, the leadership. And then it was like, okay, things I'm not so driven by. I stopped having to prove myself with that a long time ago. Proving myself in terms of being a queer man continued. That continued.
Yeah, I kind of, it comes back to that kind of childhood and like you say, conformity, social conformity. And, you think about growing up during that period, kind of, and certainly around the period of kind of the AIDS epidemic and stuff like that, there's so much pressure to suppress and hide. And I can't even imagine what that would be like.
If you think of being a young person, a child, and realizing that you like men or boys, and you put on your mum's watching the TV, and the TV's saying AIDS, gay men are going to die, kind of thing. It's like, oh my gosh, like, this is a punishment. This is, I shouldn't be this way. There's something wrong with me. And that then just validated what all the children were saying at school.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, they're right. I'm not normal. It was a time where I started to become mentally unwell and would lock myself away. I developed body dysmorphia disorder when I was about 12, and that led to OCD, to anxiety. And it was a lot of it stemmed from me just not feeling worthy.
Yeah.
And there was other bits of trauma that was happening in my life at that time. So all combined just pushed me into that way. So I feel like we need a society where children are celebrated, not being told to be a certain way, to be encouraged to be their authentic self. And then we just see such beautiful things, like why try to dim someone's light when their light is so beautiful? And I say that to employers, it's like, allow people to come into work and shine. You dim that light, you dim their productivity.
100%. And if you don't allow them to be their authentic self, you're not fully realizing them as an individual.
Yes.
And great leadership is about, in my humble opinion, it's about creating a platform for people to shine.
Yes.
Because you and I both know from our recruitment background, right? Businesses are businesses, right? But they don't function without the people.
Yeah.
You can have a great product, a great service, great bit of tech,
but
nothing's happening without the people that drive that forward.
Yeah.
So investing in people, you are investing in your company. You may be super passionate as a founder or co-founder about your tech.
Yeah.
The investors may tell you it's absolutely amazing and you need to drive that forward. And that's the thing you need to focus on and drive. But without those people that align to that mission, put their shoulder to the wheel and push that forward, your tech, your product, your service will stay dormant.
Yeah. I was curious when I used to see recruitment firms going up for sale.
Yeah.
Because once you lose the staff,
exactly.
those are the ones with the client relationships. Those are the ones that the candidates keep coming back for.
Yeah.
Not your tech.
Well, that's it.
And not the infrastructure around your organization. So they just sell it for loads of money and bring in new management and everybody leaves.
Yeah.
You've got the name, but
do you remember the old kind of like the old kind of pitch meetings where they'd be like, so what's your USP? Oh, it's our database. And then LinkedIn decimated that idea completely when you're sitting there like, it's our database. Can we find those people on LinkedIn? Yeah, probably. Kaboom, suddenly it's gone, right?
We'll just hold on to the fee we're intending to pay you. We'll have a look on LinkedIn first, if that's your USP.
Oh, that's brilliant, man. That's brilliant. Kind of coming back on to recruitment. And you and I have shared experiences in recruitment. We've been in recruitment for a long time now. And I was wondering, kind of, when you went kind of in-house, how easy was it to really drive through more diverse recruitment strategies? Because companies are always talking about, we want diverse talent, we want diverse pools of candidates, et cetera, et cetera. How easy was it when you were certainly kind of corporate side and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I did have ownership of the PSL. So I was then working with suppliers and stipulating how I wanted diversity to look.
Brilliant.
And it was interesting as well, having recruiters, suppliers come in to talk about what they're doing in diversity. It was a challenge to drive it in-house because everybody's supportive. I was based on the HR floor, so we're all bought into it. As soon as that filters through down to the hiring community, they just want to go back to the red brick uni, an intern from their mates, child, like they're coming in that's, privileged and white. And it's so, it was a tough one. And I think a lot of it fell on gender. And so we want more women. We want more women. But so what are we doing without EVP? How are we changing our benefits? Why would women want to come here? What language are we using in the job ads? Then we started using like a gender decoder. So we could get more applicants, but then if they then went to meet the hiring community, did those women, because it was, let's say it was mainly women, did they feel comfortable?
Yeah.
Did they feel like our interview process gave them an opportunity to show who they are? Or did they feel that they were just meeting a panel of white middle-class leaders or hiring managers? So it was a challenge. I mean, there were definitely successes in places, and especially within the tech side. So organizing education and classes for women to help return to the workplace, to learn new skills in tech. Those initiatives were really good. And we had a tap on the shoulder one at Barclays. So AVPs that were doing really well, women, would get a tap on the shoulder to what do you need to give you that confidence to start applying for VP roles?
Okay.
As we know, men will apply for jobs when they only have a small part of that.
I think it's about 17% of the criteria they'll apply. 17%, they'll happily apply.
And for women, that's not the case. It's quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah, it's about 65% plus.
Yeah. So let's say there were some positives. Doing things like that were really great. And also creating employability support for women that had gone off on mat leave, to have children that we wanted to bring back, around coaching around getting their CV ready, what jobs to apply for, and then building confidence. So those things were really positive. I just feel that it was still a challenge. So if we had a great female applicant and she just needed to tweak her hours slightly because she'd got a school run or something, that was such a challenge to get a hiring manager to shift and be like, no, we work these hours.
I mean, it's interesting. It's great to hear that those initiatives were, kind of being sort of driven and kind of rolled out within corporate. But within what you've just described there was not really a mention of LGBTQIA. And it's kind of, I often think about this in the context, and we think about this in terms of recruitment, right? When you're sitting there in front of an interviewing panel, if you will, or at least when you're going through a process, you want to see somebody like you. That's a representation of you. And I think that's the piece that maybe is missing, because we both know that those leaders, so when it comes to the leadership level, right, they may want diverse talent coming into the business, but are they assessing that leadership layer? Or does that leadership layer look exactly the same as it always has?
It does.
Because, exactly.
and it will for years to come, because organizations have their succession planning. So for years, they've been working on middle management, getting them ready to take on leadership roles. And that middle management is white male. So, but they are the succession plans. And I can see the point that they've invested a lot into getting those people ready for leadership. So their natural way of approaching diversity is to bring in younger people or on their grad scheme that do represent more diversity, and then hope that they will retain them and keep them as they progress. But that will be a long time. Really.
But this is it. I mean, then you're talking about potentially the profile change in the leadership layer taking years. I mean, not a matter of months, you're talking years. Because ultimately then you're relying on those middle managers moving up.
Yes.
Or moving out.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if, that new diverse pool of talent that you're bringing at kind of entry level or analyst level, or whatever it is, they hit a glass ceiling and they leave.
Yeah.
So actually what you're saying is there's probably a level within a business that's quite diverse, but the other tiers look exactly the same. And I was kind of curious to know what kind of actions, activities, policies, procedures you would recommend to break that, basically. I mean, there's no way you could try a softly approach of, if we can have a fast track into this particular area, that's not going to be enough. You need to break that model. You need to disrupt it, because that kind of fundamental change has legacy.
Yeah.
And so when you're going into kind of businesses now and you're kind of advising them, I mean, obviously there's almost a kind of, okay, where are you now? The kind of as is.
Yeah.
When you start talking about the kind of 2B in terms of changing hearts and minds consulting, what are you advising them to do? Where's the starting point?
Yeah. So, representation and visibility is everything. But as you've just said, we don't always have that in the leadership team. So it goes back to allies. So if your leaders are true allies, then that will come through. And with your storytelling on your media, your socials, giving examples of your leadership, truly taking some action, supporting charities, for example, that are looking after young LGBT folk or homeless LGBT folk, or just stepping in to do something that's actually impactful. Those visions, that visibility then for an LGBT person will say, okay, well, there is no one like me at that level, but I see that they want people like me.
Yeah.
Stick a rainbow flag on your desk in the office. When a new person joins, if they're LGBT, then they see that flag and think, oh, I'm welcome.
Yes.
But that can't be stuck there as tokenism.
Yeah, exactly.
If it doesn't mean anything, there's no point putting it there. But if you are an ally and you put your flag on your desk, there might not be any other queer people in that office, but you see that there's a flag and somebody's got your back kind of thing. So you instantly relax. So there's ways of having representation, even if you don't have people from those communities, because you create allies within the leadership, and they are openly then, people should follow a leader. In my experience, as a good leader, people followed me. If I say something, if I say, right, this is what we're doing for inclusion, this is how we're going to support the LGBT community, okay, then people listen to that. So it needs to come really from the top, and then supported by the stuff that you are doing more at grassroots, and the way that you're working to just interact with our communities and to get people to come on board and join your company. But again, that's work, that's building your brand, that's looking at going back to the EVP. What are you offering to our communities that actually appeals to them? So, for example, some of the things that are still needed, by the way, but some of the policies and benefits around childcare and stuff that's often not relevant, not always, because thankfully now we have LGBT people with their families, but for some, they know that that's not what they're going to be doing. So what benefits do you have for single LGBT people or people that are looking at a different journey in life to having marriage, children, families?
And in terms of, and we touched upon it, and you sort of mentioned about the kind of press coverage on the sort of trans community. And I think it's important to think about equally, the broader community and how your business is going to be inclusive and accepting, right? So, how, and this comes into the kind of recruitment side, right? Yeah. It's like, how do you educate recruitment teams to make sure that they're not unconsciously biased and screening out people? Because ultimately the leadership may be 100% bought in to allyship, right? They're 100% there, appetite bought in, policies, procedures, bang. What does the recruitment team need to do?
Well, then that does need to filter down. So I think that's a really big, great starting point. But then as it starts to filter down, you have to look at like how you then put things into action. And certainly within the hiring community, looking at bias for all diverse groupings, that needs to be addressed. And a full review of your recruitment, end-to-end recruitment process, a full review of your employee life cycle, like what spots, what places in there are causing barriers, how are you helping more marginalized communities, LGBT communities to overcome those barriers. And then also a real thing as well is like progression planning. So if there's no leadership that are from the LGBT community, but as a young LGBT person joining, if that organization can say, we have a clear progression plan for you, this is how you're going to get to where you want to be, then that means well. But again, that needs the managers, it needs anybody that would be involved in that progression plan to commit to it and to have no bias and to be giving roles to the best person for the job, not the person that looks like them, sounds like them, and thinks, okay, he's my pal. I can always stand and have a beer with him, but I'm not really sure about this queer one. So, and we find even as well, like as you get even more seasoned, I refer back to some of the conversations I have with my friends, 40-year-olds, 40-somethings sat there, and so some of them have hit a bit of a ceiling in their careers, and they do feel that part of that is because they watch how their managers, directors, with senior people are having conversations with their peers at VP level about children, about holidays. And we're excluded from that if we don't have that. And not a lot of LGBT people have that to talk about. So, and that's a connection. Once people have a connection, they feel more inclined to want to support that person.
100%. And then it's once that connection's there, whether consciously or unconsciously, that could influence their decision making. So it could be like, oh, this individual, kids going on holiday to go to Portugal, blah, 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 they've got a lot of growth potential.
Yes.
And then they're looking at like one of their, like a queer man or a queer woman in their team, and they're like, great worker.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of almost like that kind of relatable. It's like in the context of work, great worker.
Yep.
But oh man, they and we went to Portugal last year, blah blah blah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then suddenly the conversation dynamic, to your point, is different. And that starts to influence the sort of, kind of maybe decision making.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily sometimes need to be like, I'm going to put you forward. It might just be like, oh, this opportunity's coming up. And those little micro actions and communications, it does. It over time, that momentum gains more and more advantage. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Does. Yeah, it does. It is something that I think that needs to be addressed. It's the relationships that directors build with their team. A lot of it, as we get older, does become more, when you're looking at progression planning, then you're also thinking of their journey and how they bought this house and how they got the family and how they're going to Portugal for the holiday. Or let's help them move into, so the kids can go to a better school. And
then it becomes advocacy.
Yeah.
And unconscious or conscious advocacy.
Yeah.
For people that look like me.
Like me. Yeah.
And I think this is the thing. It's like, it's not enough, I think, to have policies and procedures. You need to be, educating and making people reflect on their overall actions. And my question is always, are they being fair to everybody? You know what I mean?
Yes. Is it a consistent approach that puts everybody on a level playing field? And often it's not. And organizations, when they set out to have inclusion, their thought behind that is that, oh, it's okay, we'll have a queer person come work here. But then when that person starts, they find that it's a case of, you can come work with us and be like us. And they're not celebrating this diversity. They're not putting things in place to support this diverse person. They're just like, well, we do this, we go to the pub every Friday and da, da, da. And they don't change anything. And that's the key. If you're going to go out and recruit people from diverse groupings, then you first of all have to look at what's happening internally. How will that person land? What support is there for them? And are the team actually aware that this is going to be a commitment from everybody? It's not just a case of, oh, we accept that. You can come join us. And I think lots of organizations make that mistake.
Yeah. And I think this is the beauty of, you now setting up Changing Hearts and Minds Consulting. And I love the name, by the way. It's so you. It's being there to, in some degree, to begin with, have a conversation around, okay, what do you think you're doing, and what do you think you're doing correctly, and what do you think or what would you like to do? Because ultimately as well, change in some businesses will take time.
Yeah.
But you've got to be prepared to put the effort in over time as well. And equally, there's probably some things that companies can do very quickly and immediately that they may not even be kind of aware of. And I think it's kind of opening that dialogue with you to come in as, first in some degree, an advisor, right? Okay, these are the things I've observed. These are the things I would recommend. And then maybe moving forward to certain project initiatives, etc. And how do you find that engagement model? When companies and business people and companies are coming to you, what's the starting point for the conversation typically?
Well, I mean, I'm also a qualified lean practitioner, so taking hearts and feelings to one side, I would always adopt that approach. Like, what is your current state? What's your desired state? Where are we looking at finding solutions? Deep diving, all of this.
Exactly.
So I adopt it in the same manner, but obviously more heart-centric and coming from it's looking at how we can. People are humans, and we need to each one to feel welcome. So there's a lot of excitement usually initially. It's when you start speaking about spends for it. It's when you actually set actions that people are accountable for, that it all starts falling to the wayside. So you need to be committed. You need to have a clear understanding of who's doing what, how they're accountable for that. Are they equipped and trained to do that? And are they aware of the timeline? And if they're not, then it just becomes lots of nice conversations with somebody that's in the organization that thinks, I'd really like to do this.
And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Don't kind of read into the fact that your business is called Changing Hearts and Minds Consulting, and it's like something really fluffy and nice to do. You come with a very clear framework to look at ownership, objective outcomes, tangible things that deliver meaningful change. And I think that's an important distinction to make. It's like, this is not about you coming in, maybe giving a talk, everybody feels great for like the next couple of days. And then you can come in and actually really put in a framework to deliver meaningful change. And I think that's powerful. And equally sends out a message as well. We are prepared to put the work in to make meaningful change. And to your point, look, I mean, anything that's people-centric, it always kind of, again, it comes back to that point around companies like, I don't know if we've got the budget or spend for that. If you don't invest in your people, you have no business. So, it may be a decision between, do we put some money into this new product feature? Or do we put some money into our people? Well, sure, you can put some money into that product feature. But there's no people in the business to drive, the kind of outcomes of that product. It's wasting money.
It is. It is.
You've got to be really clear in terms of like, we need to invest in our people X budget, and it needs to be ring fenced and protected. Not immediately, like in the current kind of, certainly in the current sort of investor market, where everything's starting to go lean and everybody's pivoting to profitability, and they don't want startups with loads of kind of debt. They can't just crap themselves and decide to take all of the money out of the people budget and just bung it into the product and service. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's not a sustainable long-term kind of approach. It's not a sustainable long-term, kind of strategy, to be fair, because ultimately what they will do is short themselves instead of actually being able to move forward in momentum, because they're shorting on their people.
Yeah. And two things. I mean, attrition is expensive. And if you're losing talent because they don't feel engaged and included, that's would have been worth spending the money. And then you go and start recruiting. But will people want to come work for you if you don't have the right EDI in place? And Gen Zs will definitely say no. So it's worth investing, because otherwise you're only going to pay for it later.
100%.
It's a thing to cut when you're looking at your spends. You think, okay, so I'm going to go to our CFO. I've managed to cut this much money by removing these things, but it's not something that will end up resulting in a win for you, because it will actually be more costly long term.
100%. So before we close out, what I would like to ask you is, what is your hope for the LGBTQIA community, whether that's in kind of 2023 or more broadly? What is your hope for the community?
Firstly, to get our house in order, because when I ask for allies, that also within our communities needs to become more prominent. So some people have a better seat at the table, white, middle-class gay men. And that's great. Oh my God, it's taken a long time, a lot of hard work to get there. But don't just sit there. It's your time now to amplify the voices of the more marginalized people in our communities. And you need to get them a seat at the table too. It is your responsibility. People fought to get you in those seats. You now need to do the same. That's, and they're big shoes, because the people that went before us were campaigning and fighting. And so you can't just think, well, I'm okay now. So that's the first thing. We need to educate and get our communities all supporting an allyship for one another. And then the other thing is, we don't want special rights. We don't want anything. We just want human rights, equal rights. That's it. So we're not shouting out and making noise because we want something special or different to anyone else. We just want what everybody else has. And that should be a given. The backlash that's occurring at the moment, the far rights throwing all of this propaganda and just really doing a lot of damage. There's a lot of regression. And so I really would like to help, in my tiny little way, turn that tide. And stop progression again, rather than allowing us to keep going back. Like I said at the beginning, so they start with the more vulnerable. Let's start with our trans community. It's in a small percentage. If we villainize that community, we'll take away their rights. And then that will lead, so they'll keep chipping away, and it will change, and it will filter through down to everybody. So we need allies outside of our communities. We need people. This is why it's changing hearts and minds, because I'm not actually going to be kind of activist and shouting out for equality, because there's organizations doing that already. My intention is just to raise awareness, to celebrate what we do and who we are, so that people allow us to shine our light and not to dim it. But that is, if it sounds fluffy, I mean, I'm 20 something years in the corporate world, dread to say. So it's not a load of fluffiness. There's a lot of substance beneath it, but I'm not in any way going to be, unless I feel it's appropriate, in some kind of activism role. It's about just the way of making new allies and social impact.
I think in some respects you're probably taking on one of the tougher challenges, which is, activism is fantastic and absolutely should be celebrated. Going into businesses where there's kind of entrenched hierarchy, entrenched thinking, and actively trying to change that, that's a tough that's a tough route to take, right? So whilst you're leaving the sort of more activism to kind of organizations that are clearly well positioned to do that, your small part that you refer to there can have massive impact and change and a massive impact. And I think, so I was talking to Kat Gabrielle on one of the previous podcasts, and she said she is sometimes her route to the end goal is longer, but she is creating a pathway for others. So that taking that longer route to get to that end goal, she knows that the actual magnifying effect is going to be far more far-reaching for Black women and Black queer women as well.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So your journey and the way I see it, the journey you're taking, it may be a longer route, but it can have so much more meaningful change, and you will create a pathway for others.
I really hope so, and I feel like it plays more to my strengths. As I think you said, I have lots of empathy. I feel like I can connect with anybody. And so I want to use that skill to change hearts and minds. I'm not like the loudest. I'm not the person that will be the most aggressive around activism, but I will happily take on the side which is more around emotional intelligence and empathy and caring, because that is really reflective of who I am.
And you have passion, Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, that much is evident. And, activism comes from passion. And activism can come in many different forms. Doesn't need to necessarily be kind of, flag waving and then kind of like, kind of walks and kind of marches. It can come in many different forms, and all forms are important.
They really are. Peter Thatcher is like one of my inspirations, is someone I've just looked up to for many, many years. And he is an activist, and he does make changes, and he demands equal rights for the LGBTQIA communities. But also then out of that, he's also involved in raising awareness for other demographics and people that don't have basic human rights. So, but I just admire everything he does. But that is not really me. So it's a way for me to do something that hopefully will achieve some results by doing it my way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end. Lee, thank you so much for sharing your story. Genuinely, you've been so, and as I would expect from you, just so open-hearted in terms of sharing your story, your vulnerabilities, your successes. And I can only see you inspiring others. So Lee Thomas-Wragg, thank you so much for being a guest on Never Mind the Job Spec.
I thank you. Thank you for this slot and this opportunity. Thank you, Glenn.